What's good? What's good? So, peace. We'll let YouTube go ahead and put its feelers out. And those probably been about 10 days since I went live on the Soul to Soul conversations. So, we're back at it again. And we're going to cover something pretty interesting tonight. And I'm going to treat it kind of as an intro. So, what we're going to cover tonight is Kandi Buress and Todd Tucker's recently announced divorce. And so we're going to kind of dig into that, look at the numerology behind it, aside from opinions and all that. All I want to do is just look at the numbers and see what shows up, and give us some insight. It's always good to get a different twist, an angle or a view about the dynamics of relationships, because many of us know relationships hold a level of nuance. It's not always cookie cutter. It's not always straightforward. And so, because of that, there's a lot of insight and lessons for us to learn. The good thing about relationships is that there are fundamental drivers behind relationships. And from the Living Soul Numerology system, what I like about the system is it takes us to the energetic basis. Um, because a relationship is not inseparable from the relationship base, from the energetic base, I should say. And so when we begin to understand the energetic basis, it helps us to be able to gain multiple perspectives, multiple insights, and expand our range of thought um, about relationships. So, what I want to do is tap into this. Some of you are familiar with the Living Soul system or are trained, so y'all kind of would understand the numbers as we get into it. But let me know what city you're from. Let me know if I'm clear. And I appreciate it. All right. Let me know what city you're from in the comments. And any questions or any feedback, feel free to put in the comments and I'll try to address it, as I begin to conclude what we're going to do. So, again, I'm Satori Seals. We're doing the soul to soul conversations. We're going to tap into the recent announcement of the divorce with um, Kandi Buress and Todd Tucker. So, had some people ask about that. And also, I must go on record and say I'm a fan of Kandi. I like Kandi. She was my favorite person in the group Escape. Uh, Very sharp woman, very smart businesswoman, and as I understand that her and Todd were married for like 11 years, and so they're just kind of they're disbanding. Um, so again, like I was saying a little bit earlier, I'm not into to push opinions and of what they are, what people thought they are. I just want to highlight the energetics behind them individually and collectively when they come together and as they were a unit. And since it's public, I was like, you know what, this is probably a good thing to cover. We can pull out things out of here. Okay, so there's soul numbers. When you talk about Kandi's soul number and Todd's number, Kandi's soul numbers is 5859. So she has a double five. She has androgynous energy in her soul numbers, and she got double androgyny, and she has a double masculine. Pretty interesting. Um, Todd, his numbers are 8425, and so he has a little bit of a blend. He has some masculine energy, feminine energy, and androgynous energy. Okay. And so when we look at this, what we do inside the Living Soul Numerology system, we look at the relationship and we begin to combine them together to see what it generates. And it generates a lot of different things on several different layers that we look at to see, different scopes and angles about the relationship, because some areas might look very strong, might look very promising, then other areas might, ooh, if this is not addressed, it can become an issue. So looking at their score, what I want to do is tap into some key metrics or scores to support what may have shifted them, to for them to come to the conclusion to cancel their relationship after 11 years. Okay, there's a lot of different ways you can hit this, so I definitely probably do part two and stuff like that. So what I wanted to bring out is that, as a lot of y'all know, we've been following. We know there's three primary gender energies: masculine, androgynous, feminine. They take different positions: dominant, neutral, submissive. And then we also have these five soul elements that helps us understand what's being give and what's being given or received inside the relationship, what's not, what is, and so forth. And so all this begins to create a lot of different insights to give us some understanding about things. So when Candace, I'm sorry, not Candace, wrong person I was doing, but when Candy and Todd comes together, their energy combined becomes androgynous. It becomes androgynous neutral. So they're not going to have when we see people in relationship breakups, a lot of times they get nasty, could look nasty and so forth. Because they have an androgynous neutral, it wouldn't be shocked if you don't really get the drama that people might be looking for, because that's not really what makes them tick together as a unit. Even though they're public figures and they probably, and a lot of people know aspects about their business, but their real core drivers of what they really are within inside themselves and together, it's not really going to create a lot of extra hoopla that can generate from it. I mean, it might, of course, is announced and stuff like that, and but a lot of it's part of the marketing, right? Because they're public figures and they're driving their brands. But what I would like to look at, so when the energy comes together, they become androgynous neutral. All right. And what's interesting about this relationship, you can see like what was the attraction, what attracted them to each other. And I would say that they have a lot of areas to be attracted to. So on one front, the obvious is they were attracted by each other's androgynous energy, that flexibility, that adaptability, the desire to be to keep it real, not to major and minors. There's just a level of fluidity that they both enjoy. Also, based off their soul numbers, it also hints to, in both of their numbers, that they're open to alternative ways of relating, not from a traditional sense. Now, I don't know all their business, but I saw some stuff. I know people may have questioned their relationship dynamic, but when you look at the numbers, it explains it. Now, if they dipped into the extreme of certain stuff and shadows, I mean, I'm not here to get into that. I can, but I'm not here to get into that. But what I'm saying is their view on relationships is really outside the box from conventional um, standards, and it's but it makes sense when you look at their numbers. They both have this aspect. They have a sense of freedom in the relationship. Okay, and so and they have this level of room to breathe. They have a lot of air element inside the relationship, so there's a strong desire to have space, but to still be connected. Okay, And so sometimes when you have too much space without some direction or a container, it can get out of pocket, and the very thing that you thrive on now could begin to work against you. So this is one of the first things I see in a numbers is that the exceeding desire to have a sense of freedom without a container really allow things to get pushed in a different direction. Now, because they have a high neutral score and a high androgynous score, um, this is not a break up, it's a flat line. In other words, the relationship just flows. Androgynous energy goes with the flow. It don't push against the wave of things. And because they have this in a relationship, they'll just cruise into the crash. In other words, they'll just drift into the crash and not change direction. Due to them having a weak masculine score, their relationship lacked direction, is what this, the metrics is showing. I mean, let me correct myself. They do have masculine energy, but it's just not. I mean, it's in the low range. But they do have it, but they have so much emphasis on the androgynous and the neutral, and they don't have any dominant position. So that lack of dominant position in this case almost like it pulls away from the masculine contribution that it does have. And so there's just an easy tendency to kind of just go with the flow and be very permissible for what each other are, which is a great dynamic. The problem is there's an aspect in relationships where you need, you got to have some direction, right? You got to have an aspect where you can support, another aspect where you can be non-confrontational. The problem is their sense of non-confrontation is extremely high, which means that they're very permissible, they're very mindful, overly mindful of each other, or and stuff like that. And what happens is it can almost stagnate you without you even realizing it. So, and sometimes we think about relationships, we think everything has to be perfect. It's got to be like this, not realizing this aspect of relationship where there is contrast, where there is conflict, not toxic conflict, um, not toxic conflict or anything like that, but um, a conflict that really moves you into the growth and to the evolution with inside the relationship. Okay. So, excuse me. So when you look at their relationship, they have this aspect of conflict avoidance that goes on. It's very strong due to the fact that they have a lot of androgynous score in a strong neutral position. So that makes them become almost to bypass a lot of things that might have need to be discussed about, but they pushed through it and kind of kept on the back burner, but never resolving it. Okay, so this is kind of the downside when they have the strong androgynous nature and they have weak dominant position or a submissive position. So it's almost like they stay in the middle and don't veer out of it. Okay, and so that kind of so again it allows a relationship like that to drift. There's not a lot of thing. It just drifts into a flat line, and so sometimes it's hard to see that. But you're like, well, they had a good run as a relationship. They had 11-year run. So why was that? Well, when we look at their soul elements, one of their strong elements was the earth wood. And the earth was it has a lot of weights. You look at in terms of sustainability in a relationship, the connection. But then they have, they have a decent water presence as well. So that's that bonding aspect that can allow them to, and be flexible and stuff like that. And so that helps. They have an exceeding over the top air. They have a lot of air in their element, so the communication is there. Um, but when we start, and then the fire, they have like a low. They have enough fire, but it's not a major driver compared to some of these other elements. So what stands out in their soul elements is really the earth, wood, and the air. But then when you look at the air and you put it with the neutral, you start to get a combination. Then we also look at the earth, wood. Well, in a nutshell, their relationship lasts for this significant period of time because it was the earth that kept them together. The earth, wood kept them together, but the air and the neutral um, kept them stagnant because it kept bypassing, not addressing issues that need to be addressed, and so it just snowballs and continues. And they're not really going to be all up in each other's face arguing and stuff like that. So they're almost like, for the word I want to use is polite around each other. They tiptoe around issues, and the issues never get really addressed when they actually need to get addressed. Sometimes you have to ruffle the feathers. They are less likely to ruffle the feathers. Also, with a strong androgyny score, one of the downsides in the shadow aspect of the androgynous energy is that it can lose its identity. So, relationship speaking, we have a lot of androgynous energy in your relationship dynamic. The shadow aspect of it is it can lose its identity of what you really are. And so I think there's an aspect in their relationship where, because they were so neutral, so allowing, not addressing certain things, that it almost like it pulled in the androgynous shadow aspect, and it enabled the relationship to lose its identity. Okay. And this comes from when you don't put proper containers in place. So you can have the freedom, you can have the space, but then it's still, you got to have a base, right? And you have to have um, some type of direction or a container to hold you, not to imprison you, but just so you can reference something or know what to stand on. Um, so I think there's an excessiveness of openness in a lot of different areas that start to accumulate all these different things. Now, when we talk about conflict, a lot of times we think about the conflict fight. In Candy and Todd's scenario is they didn't have a conflict fight. They had a conflict fade. And I'm gonna touch on that a little bit uh, today, but I'll hit on another episode, part two, maybe tomorrow or whatever, and really spend some time talking about the conflict fade. Because the conflict fade is, a lot of people relationships have the uproar, right? We're at it, we're clashing, and you just know it. Well, the conflict fade is not that. You might have indifferences, but it's not showing in arguments. It's not showing, in the more the volatile side of things. But it might show up in emotional distancing yourself. It might show up in, let's bypass this problem. You know, so when you do that, it causes the relationship to just drift. It puts it in a cycle of discomfort, um, overthinking because you're guessing because you're not communicating. So now you're assuming a lot. Um, then it because they're very neutral, you're too polite around issues that you need to be a little more disruptive. Then when that accumulates, it creates a drain. When the drain comes, you withdraw. And then when the withdrawal comes, you drift. And so the energy showing as probably behind their divorce, it was the drift factor. They drifted apart. They didn't, grow. They didn't really stay. They just kind of flatlined. They just drifted and it flatlined because they just was, um, not putting certain things in place. They was dressing. Now, here's the thing about it. Their relationship dynamic had the quality, I mean, to even extend and go for a long time. They actually had the makeup to troubleshoot, do whatever they had. But the problem is the shadow aspect of the air element um, was has really taken dominance in their relationship. Okay. All right. And so let me give you some numbers real fast when we look at their when I look at their score, Candy and Todd's score. Okay. First of all, I want to talk about the cognitive compatibility score. And This score captures, you know, how we relate, how we process, think. Um, do I have to always over explain myself because your bandwidth of holding constant, etc., is off or whatever, or it's just it's pretty easy, right? And so they have a 79, the score is 79, which is good. And so that creates a marker of adaptable harmony. When it makes sense. The strong presence of androgynous energy. Androgynous energy is very adaptable. So their intellectual or the psychic resonance with each other is very adaptable. So it's not like any problem they really had was something that it will take a lot of effort for them to resolve. Okay, that's not really their, you know, that's not their hang up, right? Um, when we look at now, this is the thing that jumped out. Okay, and so there's a score that we call it's the relationship shadow compatibility. And so the relationship shadow compatibility, what it does is it kind of just gives us a highlight and insight into the shadow that we might operate in. Some relationships don't drift into the shadow as much as others, or whatever. It just depends on both individual, or depends on what they come together, what it creates. But the thing, the main question to ask when we talk about the shadow compatibility is based off of our combination, will we empower the shadow to work its influence in our relationship dynamic? Or the shadow will not take precedence in the relationship. We know the shadow can be there, but the shadow has a weaker influence to influence the relationship to go in a certain different direction. In other words, to drift in another direction. Like I said, and with their relationship, there's a lot of drifting that is behind the relationship. And so, but what's interesting is when we pull up their relationship shadow compatibility, something jumps up, they actually score 52.5. And what that insinuates is that the relationship, that when they come together, their dynamic is to be classified as uh, an active shadow field. An active shadow field. So their relationship generates an active shadow. Okay. And this active shadow, it consists of unresolved patterns that surfaces regularly. It goes back to what I talked about the drifting part, the shadow air, not addressing things. And now we're looking at the shadow aspect. So there's an aspect in the relationship dynamic where they gave um, energy and power to the shadow. They didn't have to. There's a lot of other different things that was working very strong in their favor. For example, when we look at their polarity score, you know, when we look at their polarity is very strong. And some of you that read my book, Relationship Battery, we know we talk about their relationship battery. And so their social sexual battery is exceedingly strong. Matter of fact, looking at their score, the score of 59 indicates they might have too much, too much energy. So sometimes you got too much energy, you're trying to figure out what to do with the extra energy, there's surplus of it. And because it's androgynous, I can place it here and just let it drift and let it go anywhere. So, and they got this freedom, so there's no container. So they had a strong battery, very, 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 very strong battery. Their polarity score, right? Because when we talk about polarity, we talk about too much sameness can just blunt and kill the spark. What we're talking about is their battery has a high spark, super high charge, right? They have a perfect blend of opposites. And so that's what we do. We look at the opposites in the energetics inside their soul profiles and energetic profile together. And so across, really across the board, their polarity is totally outweighing anything that will blunt or stifle the spark. They have a super high spark. So a lot of that energy, and when it's high energy, that means the sexual energy is very high. The social energy could be very high. The active. So there's an act. So even though they have a lot of drugs and energy, but they could be, laid back and fluid, because of their battery, it can make them very. It can almost look very extroverted, like just ready to make some things happen, just be, generate activity and stuff like that. Because sexual energy is a creative energy, it's a generating energy. And so when you got that going on, it takes form in different ways beyond just the physical. It's on high, it's on charge. And so them together, they had this androgynous dominant energy field dominate their relationship. Then they got this high battery inside that. Androgyny is really about the freedom. A lot of your freedom love styles and your soulful love styles is up on the androgynous domain. So when you got that with a high charge, with a high battery, and you don't have no container, woo! It's a lot. That's a lot. That is a lot. In overextended period of time, they had 11 years in together. So almost they can create their own exhaustion of too much energy that's just free flowing. And so as we see in their numbers, okay? Now some of you might have followed the relationship a little more closely, and I'm probably confirming things even more on a deeper note. So that's a major thing. So their battery is cool. Their connection, they got for example, Candy's emotional well-being connects very strong with Todd's psychic well-being. Um, Candy's sense of stability, how she prefers to relate, which is open but grounded, having truth, having things being very, things being to mirror her and so forth. It matches very strongly. It's actually very amplified with Todd's psychic. So we see that there's the emotional and the psychic connection that Candy has with Todd is there. It makes sense. The attraction is strong. Then also Candy's her psychic lineup lines in harmony with Todd's psychic lineup. So it's cool. All right. And then also the ego aspect. So they got some different. The primary force that drives behind relationships is the emotional force, the ego force, the sensory force, and the psychic force. So they got a little bit of tension in their direct alignment with their sensory force, but they got a lot of things they have very good gravity. Um, they have very good gravity in their dynamic. Okay, so due to that, they have enough resilience in the relationship to troubleshoot if they really wanted to. But the problem is when you go through discomfort, overthinking, tiptoeing around issues, it creates a drain, it sparks a withdrawal, and then you drift. And so afterwards, so things accumulate. So this relationship was just allow things to accumulate that didn't need to. It's important to address things while it's small. And I don't think they really did that. They could have, but they just didn't. It's just because they had this very fluid nature with inside the relationship dynamic, and it was pulling from the shadow aspect, right? And they had, I mean, super high batteries. So um, now, when we talk about the conflict, because I want to highlight this because I'm going to do another episode because I think it'll be very good for us to understand. Because all conflicts is not all up in your neck, ready to fight. Some conflict has a fading nature to it. They're looking at their numbers, they have a very fading nature or a drifting nature to their conflict. Okay. So their conflict fading is coming from their air score and their neutral scores where we're pulling this at. Um, when the air is extreme, it makes conflict mental and not relational. So there's an aspect when the conflict they got going on, they start getting more in their head and they lose sight of the relating piece or addressing how to keep the high level of agreeing with each other. So it's almost like they blindside each other. It's like, how do we get here? How we have this issue? Because they're they're more caught up in the mental aspect of the conflict and not looking at the relational piece. All right. And the air can make you do that if you have a lot of high air. So a lot of you or a lot of us that have a lot of air signs and if you look in your relationships real closely, you might not see a lot of volatility in the relationship split, but you might witness a lot of drifting in your relationships. Or you might have seen a lot of this fading, just fading out. And I guess it's kind of cool depending on how you look at it. It's a graceful end. Typically that follows people with a lot of air. All right. And so they make the conflicts more mental. So they're more cerebral about it, pondering about it, thinking about it. And somehow they never get to the relational part. And so then it becomes a fork in the road, but you never see it because in both their minds or in everybody's mind that's inside the relationship. Okay. Um, then we got the neutral. It creates a conflict freeze, right? So the conflict gets frozen. And what that means is it never gets to conflict resolution. So with all the great, and this is kind of sad, right? With all the great flow and all the great attributes energetically is there because we know energy precedes reality. So the energetic basis for them is kind of ideal. You kind of, you got something to work with to let it be sustaining and enduring, which explains why they was able to do a 10-year, 11-year run. Now, in that 11-year run, they also ended a full cycle. Okay. And so when you end a cycle and right before you go into the end of the cycle, there's a transitional thing, the grumbling things, to make you bond together. Looking at the year 11, they're splitting, lets me realize that when they went into, say, like year 7 in the relationship, from year 7 to year 9, they didn't really bond closer together. They might have filled it with a lot of different activity. Remember, they got a high battery. So it's likely they just filled it with a lot of activity, a lot of excitement, a lot of things to keep them occupied because remember, they have built inside the relationship dynamic of avoidance. Which you avoid, you persist and grow. And so that is definitely strongly laced inside their relationship dynamic, which and is showing that it probably in high probability and high likelihood helped drive the relationship to the drift state into a flat line, leading to the divorce. Okay. And so when you got neutral position, you put the conflict on freeze. You freeze it and put it away. Have you frozen like some old food and forgot about it in the freezer and it's just sitting there, it's on freeze mode? You never, and you're not thinking about to pull it out to thaw it and use it no more. It's done. You don't forgot about it, but you threw it in the freezer and it's sitting there. And that's some of us can do it. A lot of us can do that in relationships. Okay. And so this is what it's a normacy part of their operation inside the relationship, which is why they have more of a fade out instead of a tumultuous end, right? Um, so with that in mind, when we talk about the conflict fade cycle, what causes it? You heard me mention it first, the air. You have a lot of air element, it definitely drives the conflict fading. So again, a lot of you that have the air in your soul profiles, you look at your relationships, you probably seen a lot of drifting, a lot of fading before it ended. Now, people, all this I'm talking about, it's just like it's like you can feel like we cool, we good. Do you realize you're not good? Because it was mental. You was sitting on here with the issues you really had and never really communicated. Even though they had like a lot of air, it's an extreme and it's amplified and it's the silent uh pricker. It's the thorn in their flesh that was hitting them. People with high neutral scores also are very subject to experience conflict phase cycles in their relationship. High air, high, high neutral, relationships with low dominance. Okay. Low dominance creates a conflict phase cycle. Um, Having a strong earth creates a conflict cycle. So when you want the earth to be strong, but if it's too strong, it just kind of keeps you just to lock in. For example, well, I'm staying here because we're familiar with each other and it feels comfortable in our discomfort, right? And so that air can lead to that conflict because you're not really addressing things. You're just kind of just adjusting everything. You're overly adjusting everything. You're overly adjusting yourself to the point of stagnation, to a flat line. So all this harmonization capability that you have, it begins to work against you. Okay. Then you have low feminine score. That's very important because it means you can be connecting socially and sexually and not really have the intimacy. And so when you don't got that, and sometimes you can add in a lot of activity, a lot of excitement and call it intimacy, and it's not. You can add in a lot of activity, a lot of excitement due to a high sexual social battery, and you can call that intimacy, and it's not. And I recall, I think there's been things expressed by Kandi and Todd, I think some in those areas. So I'm not judging it. I'm just speaking to the energetics of it. And due to the low feminine score they have in a relationship, they can allow the things that they find joy and connectivity and sensation in and misinterpret it as intimacy, and it wasn't intimacy. You know, it's not intimacy. Um, and so a lot of people will do that. A lot of people are filling in the blanks, creating activity, doing these explorative things, and they're calling it intimacy. The base of intimacy is being able to have an egoless exchange. The base of intimacy is being able to see each other. In other words, you don't have to worry about the sensations and the pleasure that you need. I take it on, and then you take mine on, and I don't even think about it, and I'm free. It's the vulnerability. It's to be able to be free to be witnessed. And this is why a lot of people don't tap into the transcendence or the transcendental or the sacred, the true sacredness in the sexual chemistry of relationships, because most people can't get past the barrier of the mind. They can't get past the barrier of the ego. Why? Well, the ego is the part that unlocks the intimacy. In other words, you have to become egoless in the exchange, an egoless exchange. Do you have it? Do you have it more frequently? Is it hard to get there? I can really tell when I sit down with people and I'm like, and you see it. And so the intimacy is they have a faux intimacy versus a true, authentic intimacy. So I think there was a replacing of what they consider as intimacy, and then they built upon the excitement, activity, and the alternative and the out of box thinking, and it just began to take the powerful battery they had, the freedom that they had, and it began to just drift it in a different direction to their own flat line. Okay. So it's not like a deep adversarial energy probably with them. If it is, I'll be shocked. I look at the numbers, it shouldn't be a strong adversarial energy. It's a drift, it's a fade energy. And they might not be able to pinpoint and define it. They should be able to after a while when they step aside from it because they got that androgynous energy. to sit there and reflect and look and be like, ooh, okay. And they should have the ability to reflect on that because that's one of the measures we look in relationships too for the endurance piece is the self-awareness. Um, they have enough neutral position in both their individual profile and androgynous present, and to be able to look at themselves. So I think as time goes, I look for them to be on the positive side of co-parenting, not generating conflict. I think they're going to probably do that very well. I'll be shocked if it goes. I mean, don't get me wrong, because things can get real crazy. I know of all people, but um, I it's less likelihood that they'll get nasty and funky with it. They'll because they're natural harmonizers. See, that's the advantage when you have androgynous energy like that. They're natural harmonizers. So actually, I think they might appreciate each other more. And here's the humor. The intimacy that they were trying to define as intimacy in their relationship, they're going to find it separate from each other. They're going to, whether they're not together or not, they're going to find the intimacy by not being legally obligated to each other. They're going to finally understand what the intimacy was that they thought was intimacy when it really wasn't. Now, that's a good thing because you can channel that into a variety of different dealings. Um, Also, I would not doubt if they refashion how they might relate with each other. Right now, you're withdrawn and you're exhausted, so you just want to bounce out of that, right? But one thing about the androgynous energy, it understands reconciliation. It don't have to be like, oh, we're getting married again. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they might find, it might be years down the road, they might find a reconnect. That's very probable in their numbers. Um, you hear stories of that, especially with people, in mature years. They like, oh, I enjoyed them better without being married. I met a couple weeks ago. It was like they was trying to be hush hush about it. They was like, we was married like 20 years ago, but we're together. I was like, oh, that makes sense. They're like, really? I was like, now of course I'm sitting down talking about the living soul. And he was like, oh, that's us. I said, yeah. I said, y'all just actually align with your soul numbers. You curated. You were just sensitive enough and went through enough bumps and bruises. Y'all got divorced 20 years ago, but y'all are more together now. It's really not ironic. It's just ironic inside a system that advocates only one way of interacting. And so I found that pretty funny. So I'm saying with them, I don't think they're adversarial. They might be irritated by each other because the mental conflict they allow to exist versus let it be in a relational conflict. I think they have more mental conflict with each other than relational conflict. And from experience, for the years I've been doing this, typically people that have more mental conflict versus relational conflict has a way to find their their synergy with each other. They might redefine it, but the circle back is very real because again, they realize like, well, the shit I was really caught up on was really mental. My mental things about you, but the basic primary thing in the relation piece is the agreeing piece, the that harmony piece, and like I'm not in opposition with you. I might just had some mental hangups on something you did or something I didn't do or how I felt. It's all kinds of shit we allow in our heads, right? Okay, but it can happen. It can get out of pocket if we lack collective reflection and individual reflection that's needed inside the relationship. And because they had an androgynous neutral, it put more emphasis on to make sure that they were corresponding with each other. Matter of fact, because that energy was dominant their relationship, they had to be very in tune to make sure that they are fenced in with mirroring each other at a high degree. And y'all heard me many times, other drops I've done. The relationship's definitely going to fade when you no longer see yourself inside each other. If I can no longer see myself inside my lover can see themselves inside me, that is already letting you realize you're already gonna start drifting. Now the funny thing, but a lot of people ain't even found that they try to have a relationship and they ain't found themselves in each other, which is that's a whole nother thing. But the ones that maybe have had that aspect floating within inside them, and they start to see that part is drifting, like I can no longer see yourself in me. I don't see you inside me. You're drifting. You're fading. And that's one of the inside the relationship pentagon. One of the points in the pentagon is mirroring factor. And so when you lose sight of your mirror, seeing yourself inside your lover, you're switching. Can you fix it? I mean, you can if you want to, but but it's subtle. How many people you know that's really highly aware? They're looking like I don't see myself in you no more. Not because your ego knows the other stuff. I'm talking about y'all's flow dynamic, right? And then when you have that in your life, it's a very beautiful thing when you just see yourself inside each other, right? And so that's why I think they might circle back around each other because they don't have a relational opposition. That's actually cool. That's a lot more open, right? Sometimes, and they need air. They got a lot of air. So the space, they might need a legal space. They, by default, probably acted out in what the energy of the relationship needed. Y'all need a legal space to find out the real space in y'all's heart for each other. And I know I sat with too many people. I know that that's the case in a lot of y'all's relationships. I'm not going against it. I'm just being open minded and refuse to be boxed in into a normacy that's showing results that so some people get with it, you're right. Some people are very devotional and they can make it work. But they have a lot of air and they probably just need a space. That lurking thing in the back of their mind, like I'm obligated to this or obligated to that, again, mental, and it seeped in and it overshadowed the relational. I think if they get enough space, they're going to realize I don't have a strong opposition with you relationally. I just have some my mental assent of things in reference to you or about us or what I see, perceive what us doing. I just got hung up in that. And sometimes you just need space to really see and decipher. And energy is intelligent and it has a way to bring us to conclusions without us realizing until we get to the conclusion. And then we can open up and reflect and be like, dang. I will say this with the androgynous neutral energy, it also oversees reconciliation. When I see relationships with a strong androgynous neutral energy, I know back in my mind, there's a strong probability to have forgiveness, to seek the balance of each other, to seek the peace of each other. Even in conflict, we're gonna do this peacefully because I don't want you to be in a chaotic state. So that can flip to their advantage. Typically, people don't value that mindset or that tendency until you get a little more seasoned in life. It's hard, and most people getting divorced around 30. It's hard for them to pivot there. But once you get in your mid 40s, and well, you might say they're 50. I think Todd's in his 50s, and Candace is, you know, uh, she got double fives like I do. Um, but Candace about to be 52. I mean, she's about to be 50 in May next year. So they're in a very different space energetically and bioenergetically. Um, then they might move on, but their indifference isn't deeply relational. A lot of our conflict and is a big indifference in the relational. And if it's indifferent in a relational, you just got to move on. It ain't, it ain't good. But I want to draw a distinction that some of y'all's is more mental. And it's been interesting the last several weeks in my sessions with people going over their numbers, with their relationships. There's a lot of relationships been restored and been energized or have gained a new perspective of each other because I think, well, I know because people start to realize and decipher it's just a mental conflict. This is not a relational conflict. Okay. And so just keep that in mind. I think this is a very good case study. I looked at it on the surface and let me just dig into this because they had a lot on the well, not even on the surface, just on different layers. You got the ideal numbers, you got the ideal energy that you need to have an enduring relationship. They got it, but too much freedom, exceedingly high battery, um, no container, a high need for space. So if you let it get out of pocket and you dance around at resolving things, it now becomes a it becomes a big snowball and it's going to wreck you. And so, like I said, I think this relationship or them is primed to really be at peace with the hindsight, and it might circle back around like you know what, even if it's like I just want to stay in your life. Could be some stuff like that. People that draw this energy, they understand that type of language. Some of you might not, but people that draw this energy understand that language. And but they did have a lot there, but of course I think they're fully in the drift state, so they're drifting apart. They got to go through that process, and they might stay in that because the drain and the stuff like that. But I think it's just unresolved things they just did not address, and those unresolved things might have been major, but because you're so adaptable, you probably start compromising things about your relationship strength. And again, so you start to look at it as like there's some mental things that we did, not necessarily really relational. Some people you just can't get with them relationally. We can't jive. Just the relations, you're difficult. It's always this. Okay, you can't fool with it. Some people it's just things that kind of just conjuring up and majoring and minors, and it's not that deep. It's not that deep. You know. So that's what's up. So like I said, I want to use this to kind of open up the case so we can kind of pull some things out in the study with Kandi Buress and Todd Tucker with their soul numbers. So before I pop off of here, I'll see what some stuff y'all got on here. Okay. So I see something. Appreciate y'all chiming in and definitely share this, y'all. Kind of get this out here, so that way YouTube sees that people dig it, for the algorithms. Okay. So I appreciate that. So that's what's up. So we'll touch back down, and this live will be available once it's processed through. So as I close, just feel free to join if you want more insight into the metaphysical understanding of relationships, or understand living, the numerology from a different point of view. Check me out on Patreon. Just Google Patreon and put Living Soul, and you'll see me up on there. You'll pop in and just join and vibe us. Actually, like I said, some of you, I began people asking about the different books. Got books, go right there to my Patreon, go on the shop. If you're looking for some books, like, we got one, See Your Lover. Okay. Um, we have other ones you can download. We got Relationship Battery. Okay. And Activate Your Lover. Okay. And so those really quickly introduces you into a different view of relationships. It's practical, but it's backed with universal principles and laws broken down in a very understandable way, and also helps you think outside the box, but also to respect the box if you want to be in the box. Okay, so that's what's up, y'all. Check, touchdown, and we'll be back again with another episode. Might tomorrow talk about the conflict fade, because I think that'd be good, especially for a lot of people that's in a mature state of mind about relationships. I think there's some interesting things I'll pull out that'll be beneficial for our understanding. Okay, so that's what's up. I appreciate everybody chiming in. One love.